All my life I've been interested in the natural world, and a lot of it has to do with my grandfather, who grew up in the mountains of North Georgia, and he had a tendency to help me make connections with the natural world and how he lived as a kid. As far as whether I'm trying to achieve realism, I am and I'm not. I'm trying to achieve a believability. In other words, something that people can relate to and be surprised by. In many ways, it's heightened. It should be heightened. If it's not, then it doesn't have any power. It doesn't have any attraction, because what good is it for me just to strictly imitate nature? It's, it is beautiful, it's powerful. And there's many of us who suffered loss or things that are difficult, and a current theme in my work is really that going beyond that sort of bruise or wound and being able to have beauty and life beyond that. To me, it just relates to the world that I live in, because it's not easy, this life. It's not easy, but it's beautiful. So, that's maybe the story I'm telling.
Michael Sherill's home and studio are located at the end of this two-lane road in the mountains of North Carolina, surrounded by the woods and creeks that offer so much inspiration to his work. Michael's career and early reputation were built on his work in clay. His pieces were precise and clever. He showed imagination in his designs and technical expertise in the colors he achieved in firing. Over time, he began to use other elements with clay. He added metal and glass to his work, often combining all three materials in a single object. The natural world around his studio started to influence his work. He moved away from vessels and began to make more sculptural objects. The stories he tells, the seasons of life, the healing of wounds, say as much about human beings as they do about nature.
The question's been asked more than once, why not be narrative with using sort of the human form and telling a story that way. And I think it's real important to be able, for me, to be able to express things on different levels. And one of the levels that I'm trying to do is hit people visually with something that they can recognize and relate to. To me, it's one thing to make something that talks about the natural world, and then it's another thing to make something that has more going on in it than just representation of an object. It's really an attempt to catch the spirit of something and the attitude of something rather than the actual object. It has its own independence, but it has its own life and probably has the mark of me, the maker, on it. To me, that's what I hope to endow my pieces with. As far as just trying to involve people in my work, I mean, I want to visually get their eye. I want them to have the question of what am I looking at? And I'd like them to be surprised every step of the way. The creative life is one that teaches some perseverance. I think most people who are making their life out of making art almost can't help it. They're just driven to do it. When I found clay, it became the perfect thing for me, because it was a material that was expressive and immediate, and I'm always manipulating things and adjusting, and the way I figured out how to do that was clay, but in many ways I'm practicing what I've learned in clay and taking that same sort of idea back into the metal. I can make an object myself completely, something that I've dreamed up, I've created, and it can still do things that I don't anticipate. To me, that's the exciting thing. I mean, I would rather have that element of surprise. For me, it keeps me excited about what I do. I mean, that's when it sort of stretches beyond me. And to be honest with you, that's probably what keeps me working. It's not a fixed journey. It's a journey that has some adventure in it when it comes to making. When I start working on a new piece, I think I'm always working from sort of an impression of, I see it already. I see a sense of what it is and what I want. If there's any magic on this earth for me, it's being able to make something that once I've made it, it sits on somebody's table or in a museum, and it sits there and it vibrates. It vibrates with this energy of my intent and my making. I think as an artist, I don't want to use a specialized language necessarily, because I don't want people to have to learn a language to figure out my art. I'd like them just to be able to go up to it and absorb it and be impacted by it, whether they understand clay or not, whether they understand metal or not, whether they understand glass or not. My job is to realize that people don't understand all those things, and I don't want to leave them out. You know, how can I get them in? What I would like to be able to do with my art is to allow people to have access and to get them engaged, and then once they're engaged, to let them have something that has potentially more depth and more access to them as time goes on. You know, anytime I'm working on a project, there's always ideas that are sort of lurking behind as I'm working. I spend a lot of time on a particular piece, and during that time period I see options or possibilities that sort of are floating around there, and I kind of consider those. But to be honest with you, a lot of my pieces are inspired by just little glimpses that I get. I think if you believe in the world, if you have optimism about your world and you believe in it, then it behooves you to do your best, because you're adding that into this world instead of taking it away. But it's also at the core of why you make art. I mean, why do you make art? Because you have a little bit of faith that this is going to make a difference. This is going to have some kind of meaning. I started out as a salt potter, started doing raku, and the raku really was when I started seeing layers and the effects of things taking place then. At the end of my raku, I moved to barium, and that's where all the layers started taking place. And I've moved in my career, I've moved through clay and sort of the natural qualities that I truly love about it to more of an aesthetic, cleaner, modernist view. And in my recent now work, it's more that I go back almost to the natural world, and in many ways it's important because there's a loss of humankind's touch with the natural world. In many ways, I want to be seen as an artist, but the reality is that there's an old potter still living inside of my head. You know, I don't let it dictate the fact that I came out of the clay tradition, that I'm going to be a certain way or do a certain thing, because I'm sort of want to communicate with people. That's more important than whether they understand whether I'm a potter or not, or what's important about being a potter. I would like to be able to figure out as an artist how to make an object that connects with people regardless of whether they understand any of that stuff. I found out as an artist that if I make the foundation strong, and the elements strong, that when I come together to the point of assembling something, then the fruit of that is usually strong. Even if you were to take each individual little object out of its relationship to the whole, hopefully it's kind of cool into itself. It has kind of a sculptural quality or an interesting shape or feel to it individually. But when you put those elements together, that makes a stronger whole. And just sort of, it's like a community of people that have a bunch of characters. When you come back to it, I mean, there's not a person that's listening to my voice that hasn't had damage, that hasn't suffered loss, and hasn't had to figure out how to live with that loss and function. But I think that's the very act of being human, is to learn to live with the difficult things and to get through them and to get to the other side. Everything someday comes to an end, but the things that are human, the qualities of our humanity and how we affect one another, to me, are the things that really are the eternal objects that keep on having an effect all the way through the generations. When I use the sandblaster to come back at my objects and to sort of frost them, it's really what I'm doing, is I'm abrading the surface just enough to break the light. And my process, when I fire the pieces, they come out bright and shiny. And I find that the colors are more intense when they come out bright and shiny, just the glaze chemistry behind it. And instead of changing the glaze chemistry and having the colors dulled down, I prefer to have them as bright as possible. So my alternative was to start to sandblast. And then it came in to really make this sort of surface come alive, because the pieces are sandblasted, and then I take and repolish them a little bit to bring up sort of a buttery surface. The whole idea behind the yucca plant was I would watch these every spring. I'd watch them come up, and they were incredibly virile. I mean, they were like this embodiment of sort of masculine, feminine energy. And I wanted to somehow convey or capture that energy that I was getting off of the piece and be able to create something that would do the same thing. And that's what drove that. I mean, it was just observing something and going, wow, it's right there. I like working with the glass because there's some things that I can do with glass in a more immediate way in some ways that I could do in clay but would not have the vibrancy that I can achieve in the glass. It's almost a performance as you're making the piece, because it has a moment in which it's liquid or flexible, and then all of a sudden it's hard. Most of the people on my pieces are in urban settings, or in fact these very natural things get taken into very clean, sterile buildings sometimes, and and it's isolated, so it speaks in a different way when it is put in that environment. I've lived 35 years being a maker now, and I still love to make stuff. The closest moment of perfection ever in my entire life is making a good piece of art. Time in life is fleeting, it goes that fast. In some ways, I'm trying to grab hold of that long enough to remind us of how fast it goes.